You're listening to Now I've Heard Everything, conversations with the icons of our time.
They were trying all sorts of things. First broadcast from an airplane, first broadcast from a moving train, first broadcast from... Lowell Thomas told me once, I did the first broadcast from down in a coal mine.
Broadcast journalism pioneer Ed Bliss. Today on Now I've Heard Everything, I'm Bill Thompson. Tomorrow, August 20th, is National Radio Day, the annual commemoration of the contributions the radio industry has made to our daily lives. Commercial radio has actually been around for over 100 years, and as you can imagine, it has changed and evolved rather dramatically over that time. Radio in its infancy was a novelty, and it took many years for it to really begin to realize its full potential as an essential part of American life. A young boy growing up in the early 20th century was, I guess, what you would call today an early adopter, and he went on to a broadcasting career in which he helped shape the future of broadcast news. Like so many other radio journalists of the time, Ed Bliss started as a newspaper reporter. He was a newspaper reporter for several years before joining CBS almost by chance in 1943. And for the next 25 years, Ed Bliss wrote for and produced Edward R. Murrow, and later Walter Cronkite, and many other luminary figures at CBS. After leaving CBS in 1968, Bliss founded the broadcast journalism program at American University, and in 1991 he wrote a history of broadcast journalism, a book called Now the News. And that's when I had the chance to sit down and speak for a few minutes with this legend in my chosen profession. In a moment, my conversation with Ed Bliss.
This is one of the more than 10,000 interviews that noted radio personality Bill Thompson did over a 30-year span. Sit back and relax, unless you're driving, in which case, keep your eyes on the road.
So here now, from 1991, Ed Bliss.
Was it inevitable that this new medium radio and then later the new medium television would eventually give birth to news departments and newscasts and news programs?
Oh, yes, I do believe so. The example was set by the wire services and newspapers, and it evolved. It didn't start out with news. Radio was heaviest in the beginning with sports and music. But then it evolved. Then, of course, with the coming of world crisis with Hitler and the Munich crisis and World War II, then it came of age.
What were it's fun to imagine people's reactions in the early days of radio to hearing, putting something to your ear and listening to something taking place at that moment hundreds of miles away. What a thrill that must have been.
Well, it was. I had that thrill. It was 1921, and I was 10 years old, and I got a Quaker Oak box because that's what they said you did. And I got some wire and wrapped it round and round and round, and copper wire, fine copper wire, and a little tickler, a little crystal. And it wasn't hundreds and hundreds of miles. It was Cleveland, 34 miles away. But I got a terrific kick out of that. It's like a photograph in my mind. I just see it just where I was in the yard. It was in the yard. I did it.
And the impact then that hearing the election returns on presidential election night, or hearing a disaster broadcast to your ears, the impact must have been more profound than anything we'd known up till then.
Yes, because it was new. It was new, exciting.
Who were some of the early pioneers, the people who shaped the early broadcast news?
Well, you just mentioned election returns, and that makes me think of Lee DeForest, of course, who was a great inventor. And when I started working on this book, I always thought of KDKA, being the first president of the Cox-Harding election, 1920. And I was reading along there and found out that Lee DeForest had an experimental radio station in New York City, and he broadcast the returns in the election that Woodrow Wilson won. He was running against Charles Evans Hughes, and DeForest got it wrong. He went off the air with Hughes being the next president of the United States. But this was not to be the last time.
But at least he made that prediction without the benefit of the exit polls.
Yes, he had no exit polls.
It was charmingly innocent in those days, wasn't it? Just sort of we look back now and we can grin and giggle a little bit at how primitive it all looks now.
Yes, they did all sorts of things. They had singing mice on NBC, and they used to go on when there was a new transatlantic liner, why Bob Trout used to be so much on WTOP, would get to sail on the new ship to, what a dream assignment, all of those wonderful, great luxury liners they would get to go on and report. There was this thing. They would cover eclipses. This is radio would cover an eclipse. They'd send a man down to Brazil to cover an eclipse. And they were trying all sorts of things. First broadcast from an airplane. First broadcast from a moving train. First broadcast from... Lowell Thomas told me once, I did the first broadcast from down in a coal mine. And they were very proud of these breakthroughs, It was a time of testing, I think, to finding out just what radio could do.
At that point, though, it was still a novelty, wasn't it?
It was a novelty. They were trying all these things and getting a big bang out of it.
It wasn't serious journalism at that point. The newspapers, that was serious journalism.
That was serious. I don't think it really became serious until World War II. Now there was Floyd Gibbons, who had a broadcast starting about 1928-29 on NBC. A new network, just been founded a couple of years earlier, had a 15-minute broadcast Monday through Saturday. It was six days a week. There's a story. Do we have time for a story?
Feel free.
There? Well, he was sponsored by the old Literary Digest, and the publisher was a man named Cudahy. And Cudahy was a teetotaler. I've got to sound like one. and Cudahy had been hearing these stories that Gibbons was drinking quite a bit. And unfortunately, at this point, when Cudahy was deciding whether to drop Gibbons as the anchor on this show, Gibbons got tight one night and drove out with his friends to Cudahy's estate on Long Island and serenaded him at 2 o'clock in the morning under his window. That was the end of it. And so that's when CBS saw an opportunity, and they got Lowell Thomas. And Lowell Thomas, 1930, took Gibbons' place. Gibbons was a fantastic character. His left eye was shot out by a machine gun bullet in Battle of Belleau Wood in World War I, and traveled all over the world. How he got his job at NBC is fascinating. He was a writer, a journalist, and he went there because he wanted to write a novel. And in the course of the novel, this man was going to report from an airplane. And he went around to NBC to say, now, how would you do that? And they explained to him how you would do that. They'd just done it recently as a stunt. And he began broadcasting there. I don't think he ever wrote the book. I don't know, perhaps. But he stayed there and became a broadcaster. And that's how he got into broadcasting, because he wanted to know how to write the book and be, have the technology right.
Well, for many years, that was where radio and initially television drew their talent from, wasn't it? Was the pool of newspaper reporters, wire service reporters?
Yes, it was. Yes.
There was no such thing as somebody who went to college to get into radio.
No, although it's interesting. Ed Murrow was never a journalist before he became such a great journalist, but he did take a radio course at Washington State University. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't know that when I started writing the book either. And the other day, a friend sent me a tape of Murrow doing a dance band remote in 1937 from Paris. There was all of this I can't believe it.
That's almost like Jack Webb doing the Gong Show. Somebody else had told me that it was maybe it was at that same course that he took in college where they taught him to pause and say, "This is London."
Oh, now that was his teacher from Washington State, and he was already reporting from London, and he was saying, "This is London," and she wrote to him, and she said, "Ed, if you pause after this, it will be much more authoritative." He was already doing the news when that development came about.
Oh, what fascinating characters! This must have been a very, very fun book to write.
Well, parts of it. It was, Bill. The research was fun. I find writing very hard, and I started to give up several times. I'd go along, and then I'd realize I've got the Vietnam War to cover yet, and you can't just tell what Morley Safer and other broadcasters did over there. Jack Lawrence, now with ABC, such a good reporter, along with Safer. You can't just tell what they did. You have to tell about the war. You have to report the war, how it started, how we got into it, the repercussions of the Tet Offensive, and did television really cause us to lose the war and to back out of it, and so on. And you come up to those things, you say, gee, do I really have to do this? And then your wife tells you you've got to. And so you try to do it.
Is the writing difficult because you are a perfectionist?
Oh, I think I am. I don't think I have that great writing talent. I wish I did. The only talent I have is that when I write a bad sentence, I recognize that it's a bad sentence. That is a good thing to have. And so you keep at it until it has the right taste, the right sound. All my writing, whether it's for print or for broadcast, I read it aloud. Or how does this sound?
But it strikes me that is a trait that you share with Cronkite, Severide, Murrow, Collingwood, all the way down the road. Do we have that today? Do we have people in television and radio today who have the ability to take a sentence and recognize it as being a bad sentence?
Oh, yes. I think of Charles Kuralt, for example, right away. Charles Kuralt is a writer. I heard somebody say the other day that Kuralt didn't like to ad-lib because he was very unsure of himself when he was ad-lib. If he had the script, he felt confident. The script would be what he wrote, usually, not always, of course. He has writers too. And I think, gee, Charles Osgood, and there are other good writers today, sure.
When did radio and television stop being reporters of events and start shaping the way we thought about those events? Or was that an inevitable development?
Yes, I think it was inevitable. There again, there was the example set by newspapers, the editorial columns and the op-ed page. I think that went way back, starting with H.V. Kellenborn, who was on the air almost continuously for 18 days during the they moved a cot into the Studio 9 there on the 17th floor, 485 Madison Avenue, and he just lived in that studio for 18 days, and was interpreting the events. There was one time Ed Murrow thought he went too far and thought he said something about I think Hans, his real name was Hans von Kaltenborn. And he said that someday he said Hans is going to analyze the Lord's Prayer. There's a little rivalry there.
Yeah. This business seems to attract such ferocious personalities. I mean, enormous egos.
Yes. I think you have to have a rather large ego to report to the American people, to tell them what this event means. You've got to have some confidence in yourself. there should be a division, though, between straight news and opinion. I don't like it when the border between the two sort of evaporates. The people should know when you're expressing opinion and when you're reporting exactly what is going on. And people should be willing to say they don't know. I don't hear very many people on the air ad-libbing about some event that has occurred unexpectedly, saying they don't know, but we don't know a lot when it's going on, and we should be willing to say so.
I wonder if we've also fuzzied the line when we put on a show like Rescue 911 that uses news footage, but is it a news program? Is it entertainment?
Yes.
I wonder if we've fuzzied the line too much.
Well, we started moving that way, I think, a couple of years ago with some programming, especially on television, and the criticism was so great of that. There's a little bit of backing away from it, as you know, and I'm glad to see that, because the two should not be confused. I was at CBS last week, and I went into this room where this woman, she said she had 40,000 colors she could use on this machine to create, and she created a desert scene for me. And then she put a tank in it, and then she put a camel in it, and then she made the camel move. And I thought, gee, you could just make up, if you don't have footage, just make it up. You know, I see a potential danger there. It was amazing to me. 70,000 different colors. Of course, these are shades of color. I said, how do you learn to do this? She said, I was an artist, and I just use this as a paintbrush, and I just...
Technology has driven the whole business of radio and television news, hasn't it?
Yes, I hope it doesn't drive it. On the Dan Rather show right now, and I hope it doesn't remain that way, they do a dateline summary of news, different places, and they have these flashes of light appearing from the middle of the picture as each dateline comes up. Now that's using a toy. There's the ability to use those facilities in that way, but we shouldn't let technology take over that, because it's distracting. That's going to disappear.
Ed Bliss died in 2002. He was 90. Now you can get your copy of Now the News by Ed Bliss by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 1994 interview with longtime CBS TV anchorman Dan Rather.
A good reporter must be skeptical. Cynicism is something completely different. I can truthfully say that while I've made a lot of mistakes, becoming a cynic is not one of them.
And my 2004 interview with CBS's Charles Osgood.
I can remember who sponsored all these shows. We knew that Ovaltine, sponsored Captain Midnight, and we knew that Jack Benny was sponsored by Jell-O, and Jack Armstrong by Wheaties, and all of that. And not only that, but in most cases, I could whistle the theme.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, this week is the Democratic National Convention, and it's in Chicago. And it features a president who has decided not to run for re-election. Last time that happened was 1968, and one of the main contenders for the Democratic nomination that year was Eugene McCarthy. So next time on Now I've Heard Everything, my 1987 interview with Eugene McCarthy.
I went around the track once against Lyndon and won that. I went round then against Robert Kennedy, and that was a tie, and then we had to run against the party. So it was the third time around the track, and we had to die different opponents every time we went around. It was like the Penn relay or something.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.